Hello, contracts. This is where it's getting exciting, right? Countdown to closing day. This is a big portion of the exam. And I've got agents getting their license for the first time, who my feedback is always, I can't pass the exam because I hate math. First of all, please stop that attitude. For those of you that might be studying along with me because you're getting your broker's license, we love math, right? This is how we calculate commission dollars and a bunch of other good things. I found that math is only 8 questions. You could miss all of them and still get a 72 out of 80 and have 15 more questions answered correctly, more than what you need. Typically, this is the place that's the hardest. And I'll be honest, for me, it's the hardest as well when I audit the exam and go check things and scope things out for you guys. So this is the big one. You're probably going to have 12 to 14 questions on this. So you pair that with agency at 10, you've got almost half the questions you need to pass the exam at a minimum of 56. Just half of them are going to be between agency and contracts. So this is a big one. And if you've taken the salesperson exam in the past and let your license lapse, or you didn't follow through with it then and you're following through with it now, this is where the exam is different than your previous experience. There's a lot more contract questions on there. Now, I'm not saying that to scare anyone, because contracts are important. I mean, this is the real work that you're going to be doing. And at the end of the day, it's going to be what really applies probably to your career the most. So it's a win-win that they have you do it. My point is, when you're going through this PSI outline, I'm breaking it down for you section by section as the review. But when you look at this PSI outline and this playbook of what is on the outline, pay attention to where you really need to focus your efforts and study. And this is the one I would study. Now, if you are using a tool like the Modern Real Estate book by Dearborn, I believe it's 20th edition, it's going to be, I believe agency will be chapter 8 and 9, and contracts will be chapters 10 and 11. So those 4 chapters, I know a lot of people teach and learn from that book. I've taught from it as well. It's a great source. Those are going to be about the 4 biggest impact chapters for you to go back and study. So just so you kind of have that as a resource. Again, that's a big one. So let's get into it. The general knowledge of contract law is its requirements to be valid, and what they can do to enforce it. And really the big ones are, it's got to be with legally competent parties for a legal purpose. Those are really kind of the 2 big ones. And I think you all will have a void and voidable contract question on the exam. I think that's very, very common. And let's just say this. Most people, and especially if you're currently an agent studying for the broker exam, we say that contracts are void all the time, right? We throw the word void around, and we're using it wrong. We're using it incorrectly. This client declares this contract void. Nope. Void is going to happen only if someone is declared legally incompetent in a court of law. Voidable is going to happen if we've got to go to court and figure it out. So void is if someone's already mentally incompetent. Voidable is going to be someone who declares temporary insanity or duress, or the big one is a minor under 18 years of age. So anything that you see that is a 17-year-old that signed a contract, like that person wasn't of legal age. Well, it's not void, it's voidable, meaning they could continue with the contract, or they could use it to raise their hand and say, I want out. And if you go to a court of law, they probably will side with the minor, but it's voidable. Big Free Britney movement right now around Britney Spears. She is in a conservatorship where she is not allowed to do any contract signing or anything with her finances. I believe as of today, her father is in charge of that, which I know is looking to be disputed. Watch the news. That'll probably be an interesting case for you to actually learn a little bit more around this void and voidable. If Brittany were to buy your house from you today, no, it's probably going to be void. Because she's in that conservatorship, she's already gone in front of a court of law and given up her right to have mental capacity to sign documents. Okay, in fact, they didn't even find her fit to choose her own lawyer to represent her in a court of law. Okay, so duress, temporary insanity, under legal age as a minor, those are all voidable. And again, if you're already in the real estate business, I know we're using the term wrong. We're using the terminology wrong. Rights and obligations of the parties to the contract. This is really going to go through a couple of different steps. And I want to actually read to you, let me grab my master book here, that I like to use. And again, this is going to be the key elements of a real estate contract. And it's going to start off with just a basic outline that, again, I reviewed a couple of these. A contract must be voluntary. It's got to be an agreement or a promise. Legally competent parties is the big one. Supported by lawful consideration and for a legal act. So again, I think legally competent parties and for a legal act when it comes to real estate contracts is going to be your big one. Now it goes into express and implied contracts, I think a little bit with some of this enforceability. And this says that a contract can be oral or written. However, some contracts require it be in writing. And a real estate contract is one of those. We cannot have that be verbal. Can you imagine if you called your lender, like, hey man, I'm buying a house. I'm gonna pay $200,000. I'd like a conventional loan, 10% down, and there is nothing in writing. Okay, so that's why those contracts need to be in writing. And that is a stipulation known as statute of frauds. Okay. Now we've got a couple of other contract issues that I want to talk about. And this goes into some delivery and notice of these contracts. First of all, to have a contract be valid, we must have an offer and an acceptance. So let's say the seller is offering the property for $200,000. I, as the buyer, write an offer for $200,000. Do we have a deal? Not until he has accepted it with a signature. So offer and acceptance. On the exam, you might see a term called meeting of the minds. That has to do with offer and acceptance. Okay. Another term that I'm not sure where it is on this outline, but I just want to make sure that I hit with you is time is of the essence, which I think is coming up here in a couple of slides. But again, I don't want to miss it at all. Time is of the essence means there are certain things in the contract that must be done within certain deadlines, or we may never make it to closing day. So for example, we may have 5 days to turn in earnest money. We may have 10 days to do a home inspection, 20 days to do an appraisal, 5 days before closing, final underwriting approval, right? There's all these deadlines. It doesn't mean that everything must be done ASAP. It just means we must hit these deadlines within the contract, or it could look like we're defaulting. So if we were supposed to have earnest money in 5 days and it's not turned in, now the buyer is defaulting on the contract. So we've got to hit all these deadlines in order to earn closing day. Okay, so a great test question around that is, if the contract says earnest money is 10 days, if that's what buyer and seller have agreed to, can the seller demand it on day 3? No. The buyer has not breached the contract yet. They've got 10 days to do it. Okay, time is of the essence. Again, doesn't mean ASAP or when they demand it. As long as it's within the range written on the contract, that's all that matters. Okay. Breach of contract, we've got a couple of different things happening. One is a suit performance, and one is a suit for liquidated damages. A suit for performance is going to be when a buyer sues a seller to perform. Maybe the seller isn't clearing up a title issue in order to get to closing. So the buyer would sue them to perform. Liquidated damages is when a seller would sue a buyer because maybe they backed out of the deal and they've had their house off the market now for 6 months or whatever, 60 days, let's say that. That's more common. And they missed the prime marketing time in the spring market, and they did all these repairs for home inspection that they maybe wouldn't have had to have done for another borrower. That's going to be a suit for liquidated damages, and typically that earnest money is going to go towards that. It's a forfeit that will go towards that. Another good term with that is the statute of limitations, which says if you're going to file a lawsuit against someone, you got to do it within a certain time period. There's a certain time period that it must happen. And there's different statute of limitations for different things. I know several states are looking at changing different times depending on the crime versus just an overall blanket. But I know 10 years is a very common number. Just for an example. Number 8 talks about termination, rescission, and cancellation of contracts. And I'm going to label this as counteroffers. Okay. A counteroffer by definition is a rejection of the original offer. So I write an offer to you as the seller for $180,000. And you counter back and you say 185. And I say, no, thank you. And then you as the seller came back, okay, never mind, I'll do the 180. Am I obligated to buy it at 180? No, because the moment you countered at 185, it rejected the original offer, so it no longer exists. Okay. The other thing to keep in mind is if I write an offer and you have until noon tomorrow as a seller to accept it. Before it is accepted, anytime before that noon deadline, before I receive notice of the seller accepting it, I can rescind my offer. So you existing agents that love to sit around on offers, hoping another one will come in and you've got dual contracts, I get it. I get what you're trying to do, but be careful, because you hold on to it too long. Someone could do what I call the pillow test, right? Sleep on it and then decide they never want to sleep in it and call and withdraw or rescind their offer before you've even had a chance to present it to the seller. Now, a new section that I think that they're starting to ask several questions on, that I get feedback from other students, is this unilateral versus a bilateral contract. And bilateral means two people are doing something, okay? I'm buying your property from you for $180,000, and in exchange, you're going to give me clear title. We're both doing something. A unilateral contract is when only one person is doing something. Only one person is doing something. So a unilateral contract is what we work with our association through the multiple listing service. I put a listing on there that says the brokerage that brings me a buyer will receive, for example, 3.5% commission. That means the ones that do bring me a buyer, I'll pay, but that doesn't obligate everyone to bring me a buyer. It just means the person that does, we will reward. It's like a lost dog poster. Whoever finds my dog gets rewarded. It doesn't mean that everybody has to do something, okay? An option is an example of a unilateral contract. And I'm starting to see more questions. Again, I get feedback about options being on the exam. And an option is a contract. It must have all the valid requirements of a contract. And it's where an owner gives a potential buyer the right to buy or lease the owner's property at a fixed price within a certain period of time. The buyer pays a fee as consideration, like a deposit. And then the buyer must decide whether they exercise the right to follow through that option or let it expire. And the reason it's a unilateral contract is because the buyer is doing all the decision. The seller is just sitting there doing nothing. The owner is just sitting there doing nothing, is just on hold until the buyer makes a decision about whether they're going to perform or not. It's almost like layaway, right? I put my money down on 3 t-shirts and 2 pairs of jeans, and the store is just going to hold it for me. And if I've not paid for it in full within whatever date we've agreed to, they're going to take those items off the back shelf and return them to the floor and sell them to someone else. Okay. Now, a couple of other things I'm just going to throw in here that I think might be helpful with contracts. And this kind of goes back to listing contracts that we talked about earlier. And this is an automated listing agreement, an auto renewal. Those are illegal in Iowa, first of all. Second of all, this is when you maybe take a listing. Automatic extension clause is another term for it. This is where you would take a listing from January 1st to June 30th with a 30-day notice, which means your sellers have got to give you notice on June 1st in order for that to really expire on June 30th. We don't like these in Iowa because we don't like gray area. Attorneys don't like gray area. They like things black and white. And if we constantly have these notices in there, there's no clear definition of when the listing actually expired. So that's an automatic extension. It's kind of like your free trial with the cable company. You get this movie channel free for 3 months. And if you don't call and cancel, then they start charging you for it, right? Another one is a broker protection clause. And this is what protects a broker so that a seller doesn't go and sell the property to one of your prospects that you met during your marketing and listing period, go and sell it to them directly and cut you out of the deal. Okay, we'll talk about Iowa law with that when we get to state review, but that just as a definition is broker protection clauses. B is contract clauses for amendments and addendums. We've talked about time is of the essence. We've talked about when an offer becomes binding, when it has been delivered and accepted, and all parties have signed it. We've talked about kind of some general requirements. Again, the two big ones are lawful with legally competent parties. I think those are the ones that are going to be most likely to be obvious to you on the exam and come up. Contract clauses are going to be amendments and addenda. An amendment changes something on the contract. An addenda adds something to it. And I've got one more term I want to throw out here that could come up, and that is bill of sale. And a bill of sale is where we put personal property. It does not go on a real estate contract because it's not real estate, it's personal property. But if that were to be part of the sale or part of the condition, it would go on a bill of sale. Okay. Some common types of contingencies, though. These are what I call subject to obtaining financing, subject to the sale of a current home, or your big common one is subject to a home inspection. Then we've discussed this already with counter offers and multiple offers. But again, counter offers, your big one with that one is it rejects the original offer. So any change from how it was originally written, that means the original ceases to exist. I do think that this is an area where you've got a lot of content. I think you've basically got a test question on almost every line item with this one. And some things that may double up and repeat. So if they ask you once, they're not asking you a second time because you got the first one wrong. That's not how this test works. So if you get something that's about an option more than once, again, doesn't mean you answered it wrong the first time. It just means you pulled a pool of questions that have some repetition. But again, this is a really, really big section for you. So good luck.